I guess it doesn't announce that we're recording anymore, but welcome back to the Rhetoric Warriors / Political Persuasion Training for America podcast. It's been an interesting week. I mean, it's been a while since I've podcasted, but you kind of have to right now if you're going to talk about politics and persuasion and rhetoric at all. Trump's a felon, and off we go. David Payne is back with us to talk about that, about how we got here. What is this that the other side can never accept, that it's a true court of law process that was followed? Is it a kangaroo court? Are we a banana republic? What do kangaroos and bananas have to do with rhetoric? We're going to hit it all today. So welcome back to Dave Payne. What is it, kangaroos or bananas?
Yeah, I've been able to follow neither askance metaphor very well.
I do think it's funny that the big metaphor. I do think it's funny the big metaphor we have for the most corrupt form of dictatorship is banana republic. I'm not sure that's a toxic enough metaphor.
Well, as usual, it's sort of the pot kettle problem of if anybody looks like a banana republic dictator, it would be Trump. And yeah, what do they do when they want to find them to be corrupt? So I don't know. I don't think they take him to court in a jury trial. I don't think that's usually the way that's handled.
Yeah, it didn't seem to be the way we did the Saddam Hussein thing. Like all I remember is some grainy video, and then his body's where?
Right. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. However, it's got to be interesting that the kind of chants from both sides are the same.
They are. They're exactly the same.
Breaking down the rule of law has gone out the window. This is destroying the rule of law. This is lawfare, whatever. So. And one kind of searches in one's memory for parallels, and it occurred to me that the impeachment of Clinton is about as close as one can get. Okay, there's a sexual peccadillo and an attempt to cover it up, and Clinton lied in a court. Once again, an unrelated, right? It was, and a sort of aggressive, at least in this case, aggressive federal investigation, kind of outside the field or the purview of the original special prosecution, decides to take this. And so, if indeed, trying to be as generous as I can with the other side.
You don't have to do that. You don't have to be generous.
Well, but if indeed, after Clinton had left the presidency, if some court, wherever the Paula Deen deposition was taken, if they had tried to prosecute Clinton for lying, in a deposition for a sexual, something that's virtually never prosecuted, I suppose, the people of my ilk would kind of go, "Oh, come on, right? This is." So that's about as good as I could do to sort of, identify with the flavor of maybe this is not the best,
But it's this weirdest, right? It's this weird coexistence, and courts are a good place to look at it, of logic and pseudo logic, true crime versus pseudo crime, and you get this feeling like the fabricatedness of this over here, like the whole Clinton thing, and then the actual criminal activity over here of the Trump thing, but they're existing within the same rhetorical space. And you can't, people can't discern between the fabricated crime and the true crime. So it's like this very interesting, those two orbs are very close to each other right now, just circling.
Right. And I guess in extending that analogy, I don't recall anyone, at least at all, saying, "Oh, he didn't do it," or "Oh, that shouldn't be against the law," or "That's all bias," right? Whereas this is kind of a full-on assault to the entire criminal justice system, the jury, Democrats. So the cynicism of identifying it and to deny the basic truth of the claim. And I'm not sure in all of that mess, and I think it is just kind of a mess of trying to discount this, disqualify this, delegitimize it. I'm not sure I heard anybody other than Trump say I didn't do it.
Right.
Furthermore, it is worth noting that in all of these things across the last 8-10 years, nobody ever says he would never do that. I don't think that this is somehow beneath him. It's all, okay. I guess the reason why I come up with that analogy is they'd say, okay, you're trying to play gotcha, you're trying to get Trump, and
Sure.
it becomes kind of a Roadrunner cartoon then, I guess.
It's this sense of, and all courts are this way. That's why they're so strict in their rules, right? Everything becomes an incredibly tangled mess of facts and claims and counter arguments and everything else if you unmoor it from process.
Right.
If you drop it into normal human conversation, it all just explodes into a mess.
Sure, that is why we have procedures, right? Or that we bound these conversations in certain kinds of ways with rules of evidence and those sorts of things.
Well, even the small trainings I've been doing, I've been doing some trainings on logic and argumentation with people, and just to break out the Toolman model and say, arguments aren't just a mess. They're very specific sets of things, and to lay that out in front of very educated, smart, good, practical people, and them going, I've never thought of it that way. Just having the technology of separating all this talk into claims and evidence and qualifiers and rebuttals, that will control a lot of it.
Yeah, this is not a cage match where we just are a poop curl, I guess would maybe be the epigram. What seems to be just back and forth of it. Yeah. And
nobody seems to want to do that. Nobody seems to want to formalize it, as a controlled rhetorical environment. Nobody wants to do that.
Well, and I think that's a nice way to think about what a jury is. And my own recent experience with this, I guess, is kind of being in a conversation with a number of people who, as it turns out, clearly lean the other direction. And someone asked, what anybody have a prediction about what will happen in the trial, and it began with an immediate sort of dismissal of the jury. They've had a week off, so anybody could, they could have talked to any friends or neighbors, they could have watched anything on TV. So, and trying to be timid about the matter, I said, well, if you were a juror and told not to do that, would you do that? And was kind of met with gaping mouths, like, well, people might have, think about the people who could have bribed them, and then and yeah, the judge is, a judge is a Democrat and actually donated money to Biden. I don't know whether that's true or not, but clearly it was being circulated as a relevant fact. And I thought, wow, if you've ever been on a jury, it's a pretty somber undertaking. And
yeah, especially
here's the job,
former president of the U.S.
This is a controlled rhetorical environment. So it isn't the presence of bias. If it was just the mere presence of bias in the world, we couldn't do anything. So it's not like that's news. And I guess to me is, why is this all of a sudden news? That, yeah, we know there's subjectivity, we know there's bias, and that's of course what the Toolman model is trying to capture. Is that's not a completely disorderly process. There are certain kinds of cultural truths that come into the logical process, and we can identify those. But the jury system kind of begins, and of course the legal system itself and logic itself begins with the presumption. All right.
Right. And
now how do we create a system where we account for that? And
well, and how do you reimpose some of that structure into normal everyday thinking, right? Because normal everyday thinking cannot withstand this much information, this many topics, this much going on in the world. It can't even handle its own everyday existence very well. Like deductive logic, is so stringent. It's so laborious. Everything has to be perfect for you to move on at all. That it ends up trying to move all that stuff, that silly bias. Like if there's one tiny flaw, which makes it, becomes an inductive thinking that, yeah, there's a possibility this could be wrong, but it's remote. But as soon as you move over there and people weirdly now cycle back around and slander the thought process as not being deductively perfect.
Right.
Which they're not even using deductive logic.
And this is, of course, why we have a intensive appeal process, right? We recognize going in that people can be swayed by arguments, but we control it so that that's pretty much all they're being swayed by. And they have to refer to the facts, right? They have to prove, which is a breakthrough, right? And seems to be completely missing from any of these other kinds of claims of bias, right? Where's the evidence? Where's the pattern? Does that mean that no jury that has a Democrat on it can ever actually render a judgment?
Well, my point the other day was it's just unfair that Trump had to be tried in America. Really, this should have been in Hungary or Russia because there to get a fair trial.
You want a venue change? Let's try.
Yes, clearly, no American court is going to give him a fair shake.
That's funny.
It was kind of impressive that there wasn't one completely irrational MAGA juror that would derail the whole thing.
Right, but that's been fairly consistent throughout. Once again, when you proscribe the jurors' duties and say, okay, there are 12 of you, and you're supposed to try to achieve consensus here. And once again, your controlled rhetorical environment, and they do persuade each other. And who are you responsible to? You're not responsible to some sort of abstract media entity or some mythological, construct here. You're responsible to other people who are sincere and saying, "Here's how I see it." And like I say, on a jury, that's very revelatory to find that people step outside of their usual frames to perform these duties pretty adequately. So, and they did report this, that because one factoid they had about the jurors was where do they get their news? And one was a Truth Social was their primary news source. Only one had MSNBC. So yeah, that one person just wouldn't dig in and say, but that would be outside the bounds of outside the frame that is given to them, that jury nullification. So while possible, once again, juries throughout this entire process that have Trump loyalists on them seem to render the verdict, which is, yeah, here are the facts and here's the law, and that's what I was asked to do.
So is it a case then of them, you move out of the ordinary American cultural context of the moment, which is rabid infusion of electronic data from all these different sources that ends up outraging you on both sides, and we move you to a hermetically sealed court environment,
right?
And everybody relaxes, and then they show them how to do logical thought again, which is, hey, the only thing you can draw a conclusion from is the evidence. And with that instruction, then people seem to go back into some kind of viable rationality mode.
Well, that seems to be how it works. I mean, that doesn't mean juries can't come with incorrect, so I don't know what component, and I would love to know as a scholar, and I'm fascinated by the phenomenon of how do you, in playing this role, and and in this particular kind of environment, and so I suggested earlier that accountability to one's peers is itself maybe a component that. And to the tradition, and there's something about the courtroom itself and the robes and all of that, and 1,500-year tradition out of which,
Yeah, it's a strong context.
Reasoned discourse evolves. And so it could well be that simply that is not fed or experienced and fueled by, journalism. So, and even the kind of, favorable, once again, I only expose myself to some parts of this, I guess. But it seems to me that even when people seem to be making attempts at fairness and objectivity in journalism, there's just so much that's missed that are repeated over and over again for what dramatistic effect. Michael Cohen's confronting the whatever, like it's like Howard Cosell calling the match in many kinds of ways. Or this is very difficult for jurors to. Well, I'm kind of going, not really. It's what
it is interesting the way they have to use the way the court and the legal system itself starts to appear when you pull it out of, again, its context and you drop it over into the sort of rabid slander politics, and the pseudo logic of modern politics. Like the fact that they can just go around, I sometimes think of it like that old video game Asteroids, which had a little gun ship at the center and would just spin around shooting everything in the ecology. And that's essentially what they do. They just go and slander everything in the ecology, no matter what it is. They slander the judge's daughter. Like they find anybody with any kind of weakness whatsoever, and they just amp that up.
Right, it's all theoretical, it's all putative. I mean, okay, how many parents know how many, kids follow everything they say, and how much of your role is fashioned by whether your children think this, that, or the other. It's it's absurd. And that is a more important and salient factoid here, or source of bias, than the fact that this judge has a 20-some year history, was chosen, has performed in these ways across many different kinds of circumstances, all of which thrown out the window because he's a Cuban. What do you expect?
Yeah, that was my favorite. It's like, let's go to his ethnicity.
Look at where he comes from.
Yeah, his
or
regionality.
This is New York. These, New York Democrats are all incapable of, weighing evidence. When indeed this is a highly educated jury.
Well, think of it too. I sometimes describe it as it's slander uranium. So it's slanderanium. That if you find one thing that glows strongly enough, all the evidence and everything falls away. It's Hillary deleted her emails. Doesn't matter if she's been in public life for 40 years. We've got a piece of slanderanium that all we have to do is just keep saying it, keep it alive, keep blowing on the coal. Right.
Well, and I don't know whether this is productive with the point or not, except I just can't help but amid all of the charges that this is just political, prosecution and lawfare, I guess is the coinage, legal warfare, weaponizing the court system. On the day that Hunter Biden is going to court, right, in the relentless pursuit of the poor man. But keeping in mind that this all started, if you flash back to the Trump convention, lock her up, lock her up, lock her up, and how much we were told about what was in these emails that never materialized, apparently, as some sort of, and can one even remember that as one looks at the Mar-a-Lago documents, the ones found in Trump's bedroom 4 months after the FBI. Anyway, so this is scarcely the beginnings of this kind of.
Well, it's definitely the interpolating as well of kind of mythos, into the deliberative. That instead of just running these things, because in media and small media and electronic media, it's always mythos. It's always flooding in, and so them turning judges into villains, jurors into villains, using these sort of law storylines that, this is the weaponizing of the judicial system, ergo, just like it's been done in these autocratic, governments. It's, to me, I'm listening to it, and I'm like, oh, to me, this is just mythos, just tsunamiing into that setting and restructuring everything. Suddenly they can only think in terms of villains coming after Trump. So just find the villains. If you can amplify them strongly enough, making Hunter Biden the villain, the cog in the Biden crime family.
Right.
Again, it's a mafioso thing, and the left tries to mafioso Trump, but it never sticks. I think because he's too clownish, and there's no evidence of him doing like murder and all the mafioso things. So they can't make that character stick. But like trying to turn Hunter Biden from Playboy, making money off his daddy's name,
Right.
into funneling illicit funds, and it's story work.
Well, yeah, I guess I find it equally difficult, or maybe even much more difficult, to cast Joe Biden as a mafia don than Trump, who seems to sometimes want to be, right?
He's definitely a wannabe don, but he just can't. It's like he's a wannabe dictator. Remember when he was posing when he had COVID, with the lights on him on the steps, and he's like very Mussolini.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. It is exasperating, and maybe that's the place to begin. And maybe that's what you mean by this kind of mythos tsunami. That it's just kind of a tumbler of, and maybe amazingly, that's that our institutions can still operate in that environment, and whether they can have power outside of that environment is another question, I guess, or just always be short circuited by the poop hurl, and that it does seem to be the strategy. Just throw it.
Yeah, to me, it's like when I detail the strategies of the right, like they pulled Fauci out again today.
I haven't followed up on that, but unbelievable.
They drug Fauci back in front of Congress for the exact same kabuki theater of MTG saying you're not even a doctor, you should be in jail. I'm like, what's this Didn't I watch this series 3 years ago? Like, you need new material.
Unbelievable. Or that they're going to haul Bragg up before the congressional committee to talk about this prosecution. Well, I guess sustaining it, and of course Hunter Biden, which is one of the greatest hits of keeping something going despite
Well, they don't care about the ratings of the show. They just got to run that show again and again and again. They've got to find a villain. They've got to play it up in this kind of very conspiratorial big thing going back here. It's been hidden for a long time because that's their strongest story structure. And they've got to impose that, or they just can't operate in that environment.
Well, it does seem to be like the larger media, media environment itself, that there's just the demand for content is just far outstripping the availability. Right. I'm watching shows for the third and fourth time.
It's ridiculous. We clearly are going to have to super fund media production in this country because.
So maybe it is simply, to be thought about as, nature hates a vacuum here. And so there's so many hours to be scripted. And indeed, as I watched the other night, this weekend, Sunday night, I guess, last night, kind of on MSNBC, there was this review, blow by blow of the trial, and sort of intense, micro analysis going, this is really kind of just same thing. You're keeping it going because you got nothing new.
Well, it's not only beating a dead horse, it's dissecting a dead horse.
Right. And I thought, man, this, how many times have I heard this same point being made? And I guess, once again, for whom does this work and does it work becomes an interesting issue. And I think we can refer back to just standard sort of political wisdom. I mean, you've got to keep people paying attention to the watch to maintain the hypnosis, I guess. That there is a kind of a drama demand on the part of many participants for they want, it's like the 2 minutes hate in Orwell, right? They want to feel that, they want to have that revved up again. So the pathos here is a renewable resource, and if you neglect it, it will probably find someplace else to focus. So there is a kind of a maintenance strategy there. But whether it really changes minds, is anybody's mind being changed that going to walk into a voting booth?
Well, and that's been my
Hard to
thing
say.
about like going out and doing podcasts, Christian podcasts and right-wing podcasts, and having people on my show from the right. It's that if you're going to do any kind of political effectiveness, just doing comedy or doing training for people that are already liberal and rational isn't doing you jack. Like, you have to learn how to actually talk. And I grew up in Kentucky. I was Catholic. I know how to talk to the right. I don't care about cleaning up their logic all the time. And I don't let that stuff get to me. I get in and I'm like, okay, I retreat into their meta spaces that I'm safer, because being, a rhetorical academic and professor before, that I can at least go, hey, I do study this stuff. Do you want to learn something about it? And sometimes they do. And then being a comedian, I can say, well, it's America. We're supposed to have fun with this. Let's try to relax a little, and I can treat over there. And both those give me at least a little bit of safe space to talk, to the right. But the only thing that matters is talking to the right. Like, I think that liberals are going to come out and vote again. There's enough boogeyman-ness about Trump, and it seems to have enough validity that they're like, don't vote, or don't vote for Biden. Look what else you got. And I know the Israel-Palestine thing has been played up in the media about like Biden, has taken a lot of hits there. And the last election, Biden was still not a very well-known national figure. But now he's been in office for 4 years, taking the direct slander from the other side. So he's absorbed, a lot more negativity than he had before.
Sure.
So when I look at it, I'm like, yeah, but the only thing that matters, maybe it's, making sure your base gets out to vote. Clearly that's part of it. But it's also, can you go into the red herd and, maybe call a head of cattle or two?
Well, I like what you said about, the important part is to talk to the right. In other words, what's being squeezed out of here is any sort of dialectic, any dialogue between the sides, right? And that's what, some people, half the people watching Fox News and half the people watching MSNBC, if it were all that simple, will not achieve, right? It's like the old Crossfire show, right? And somehow writ large, that somehow this is toxic to public discourse. So the spaces on which that kind of conversation could take place have shrunk immeasurably. Just from my own vantage, seems to me you probably do better as the comic than as the credentialed. I try not to pull credentials in these things. I'm just fearful that.
Well, I pull soft credentials.
Yeah,
like I pull
I'm
very,
fearful
very
that
soft
this
credentials.
Maybe being an ex-professor helps you,
right?
Right. I used to do that, and so I thought a lot about it, and I think that's probably a good way to approach it. But so yeah, I do think there are these little inroads. I don't know, you can't completely abandon them, I suppose. But once again, there's just so many jaundiced kinds of things to this process. As far as I can tell, 25% of the people say they're Republicans, 25% say they're Democrats, and there's 50% that sort of say, gee, rejecting either of those identifiers. And although they clearly have their leanings, yet how this seems to call out in any binary election is 47-47 with somehow unaccounted random ions out there, right? Radicals, I guess you would think of them. Anyway, It's
Well, I was trying to write new slogans for Trump this week because, like, there are explainers, I think, beyond what politics normally lays out. Comedy has some of the explainers for why people vote for Trump. Like, Trump, at least he's not boring. I hear some of the interviews with the people on the right, and they're like, "He's my guy. He'll get out there and cause trouble." And I'm like, "So you're voting for an anti-hero?" Like, that's okay. They're not listening to his points. They're walking out of his talks. Even his rambly, whatever, they can't listen to. They can't process even that kind of, information garbage. But they're still reacting to the character, of troublemaker, rebel,
trickster, yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
I guess, and maybe there is something satisfying about that. I think once again you have to shift from that kind of point of view to administrator. When you got to do stuff.
Yeah, but that's a logical step, right? Like the
Keeping in mind that the
like, just get
Republican
my
Party
guy
at this
in
point in
there and
time has no platform whatsoever except to continue to throw monkey wrenches into the works. So,
But that's what reality show characters do. They
I guess.
just, every episode of Survivor, the only character that people really remember is the shit stir, the one who is the most violent, evil, plotting, just a troublemaker. And it's more
Yeah, the guy
interesting to
that comes up
watch
and says, I have no ethics and I will do anything. I'm here to win. And there is, yeah, I guess maybe you're identifying a new hero type. Wow. That's the Loki.
Exactly, right? So it's that sense of, I know he's going to talk shit. That's all I know. And I like that because I talk shit.
And somehow that develops the ethos of telling the truth. So I guess, as you've said before, that is almost a comic form.
Oh, for sure.
Trump is a comedian. Yeah.
Very Rabelais, right? Very grab everything by the balls and just, never shut up, never allow the standard culture to dominate. And, even, Biden is a very standard politician of, his talks and his elevated, we can all be this and, the kind of aspirational rhetoric. And he does it pretty well. I mean, I think he's a really decent aspirational
He's
when he gets down to
decent
it.
everything, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's
But that, that within the context of entertainment rhetoric, that's boring as hell.
right. And I think that is part of the lackluster, that people who want a hero, they want a champion, they want somebody that takes the fight. So it's not just about decency, it's about, and so I do think that costs him points from the equal and opposite side of the fervent progressives so that, because I think before this, Joe Biden would just been, to me, it seemed like a milquetoast, run-of-the-mill politician, a decent guy.
Yeah, a good legislator. That was always
Never
his
would have thought he would
reputation.
become president, really any more than Trump, I suppose, or Bush. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious your take because again, you keep going up. We just keep going up levels of this, right? So it's like the appeal process. So Alvin Bragg, down here is Georgia, and all these other little states that are kind of rumbling about the fake electors, and then Alvin Bragg, and then the federal cases, which are all stalled, and then the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court, we haven't even talked about that yet. Talk about a sense of corruption for our most hallowed body. Like that's been intense.
Right. Well, I thought about this as I was trying to deconstruct this idea of bias, that the presence of any smell of bias somehow becomes delegitimizing. I thought, well, how, and I see that with the kind of the hoi polloi response as fed probably by the Hannitys and whatever, whoever's inventing these arguments. Oh, you can't get a fair trial with Democrats or Republicans or New Yorkers or whatever. So just, as we talked about, just the mere presence of bias without any rationale for why that would corrupt the process. And then if you compare that to sort of the Supreme Court, okay, is there something different about two Supreme Court dudes who are supposed to really understand this, as the court of last resort, that bias is, they're supposed to be the summation of the process of eliminating a bias and embrace of method. And in the old mythology, RBG having dinner or going to the opera with Scalia, and completely opposite ideological agendas, but somehow being able to meet, in civilization, and rational argument, and these kinds of things, mutual respect. So yeah, so here we have these cases of okay, we can throw darts at the wife or daughter of the judge in this New York case, but when it's the wife or daughter of, but mostly wife of Supreme Court justice, right? Oh, she flew the flag.
But are these apples and oranges? Like the daughter of such and such, this one thing, out in the open and is pushing for civil discourse or whatever. And over here, because I keep thinking of this non-apple, non-orange problem that we keep running into with the actions of the right. Like, if the Nazis had survived the war and just existed as a political party instead of banned political party,
right,
and then had kept their iconography, and every once in a while would fly a Nazi flag at something, people would not be able to. It's not the same of Nazis get free speech too. It's like no. We've that's our cutoff. Like, we don't allow that one. And those
yeah, we need one of these
flags,
alternative history science fiction things of, if Nazis had
right.
won, how would 50 years or now more than that revise them back toward the middle, right?
But if you're yanking out toxic propaganda iconography, like the upside down flag,
right.
all the different stuff that's very close to Nazism, it's Nazi light, it's leading down the road to Nazi, whatever. Is that still in the same category as bias? Like, that's its own specialized extra toxic,
right.
rhetorical baggage.
The claim here does seem to be a little stronger than just putative bias. It is, okay, there's ideological commitments that are being expressed here that align them one way or the other. And it's also possible to, I guess, once again, back to, you need more than just the smell of bias. You need a theory for how bias actually plays and is not accounted for in the process. And so one wants to look for patterns. So clearly, I would want, I wouldn't want to just completely discount, right, the Supreme Court justices, Thomas and on the basis of their wife having a political opinion. I would want to look for their decisions. I would want to look for the pattern of bias as it's being expressed.
So has anybody done that? Has anybody done the rational dredge through what they've done to find?
Well, I don't know about, once again, journalism is, to me, often not doing its job in reporting some of this stuff. But if you listen long enough and hard enough, I think, to the right people, let's look at their decisions in the last 10 years concerning these kinds of liberal issues, their commitments to a certain kind of movement. So to align those decisions with the kind of movement, which is what these two flag wavings do, or in the case of Thomas's wife, her activities surrounding the January 6th. Is there sufficient bias there to cause them to recuse themselves, or to, if there were some procedure or possible procedure for impeachment, I suppose that could happen, but it ain't going to happen. So I think there is pattern there in the decision. There are statements that they make, because they have made political statements about the moral agenda here, especially regarding abortion and birth control and those kinds of things.
So is your point, like, we need to come back around to a forensic process before we jump to the bias conclusion?
Right. Well, it's just another, it's the complaint about cancel culture, right?
Vigilante culture.
What's that?
It's a vigilantism justice.
Well, there is that, right? So yeah, before we cancel these two Supreme Court justices, we really need to vet the case. However, once again, the fact of it being ultimate, there really don't seem to be procedures to do that.
Well, but take us back to the
history.
idea.
History matters too. I remember when I was a kid, there was a big sign that said "Impeach Earl Warren," a billboard, right? The one would drive by. A lot of this stuff has been going on for a long time with the John Bircher Society. There's been this radical right component playing these kinds of ideological games and fomenting paranoia and outrage. It just didn't have such a prominent voice, and that is the sea shift here. So and that is a media phenomenon that somehow, if you're really out there trying, and I think that is, and we've noted it in our conversations many times. The difference is the people who are liberally oriented don't want to be bothered by this. They want to go about living their lives and thinking that things are going to get better. That the arc of history will lead to justice and reason and all of those other good things. Whereas if you're an active fighter and your daily sustenance is organizing and having a long-term plan, the Supreme Court agenda was a 50-year plot to secure that.
Right. So, well, and I think of it in terms of this kind of democracy defense initiative or some kind of democracy protection initiative, that if you're going to protect something like public discourse, like you're going to try to keep it as clean as possible, as rational or reasonable as possible. You're like, hey, this narrativity that we're using is really polluting political discourse. This allowing in with no gatekeepers whatsoever, this just sludge of slander that never stops is destroying public discourse and our ability to talk to each other back and forth. At some point, you do have to come up with new structures, I think, for countering the polluting of public discourse. Like, you don't want to just let the hyenas at the body of democracy with no defense whatsoever. And free speech is just totally warpable into protecting the nefarious elements that are dumping the sludge in the first place. Like, it doesn't protect public discourse. It protects the people polluting public discourse as it protects everything else. So.
Yeah, no, good point. What are programs? When I hear them go, well, we need to be teaching civics in school. Well, okay, sure. I liked my civics class, but I got it. Okay, yeah, this is how government works, stuff like. And yeah, the fact that so many people don't seem to understand any of that is somewhat alarming. But that's surely not enough. How does one, how does one get controlled rhetorical environments that are designed to bring people into conversation with some sort of format that can do that? Makes me think of the presidential debates.
My ideas for the debate, I think, like, as a condition, Joe Biden one of his conditions should be that he gets to bring Major, his dog,
right,
to the debate. And he's been trained to attack anybody that says that the 2020 election was illegitimate. Sicky boy. There you go.
Well, I do like the new measures, right? We'll be able to cut off the microphones, and there will be no audience. It's sort of completely undoing, So we will have cooperating journalistic moments, I guess. I don't know what the hell.
Again, comically, I would take it further. Like, if Trump starts doing his mass interruptive, strategy again, constant interruptive and slander, that he just gets black hooded. Like, they just come up and just.
Sure.
Show people for sure. Well, and it goes back to, again, comedy takes it to the comic frame to get its point across about it or its ideas. But this idea that we need to arm the people who are traditionally rhetorically, protecting the rhetorical environment, like journalists. I watch journalists on the Sunday shows interviewing these people that are just not going to stop their monologue, and they have no tools whatsoever. There's all this going around this week about this one debate in Colorado where the news anchor actually went after Lauren Boebert,
Right.
cut her off and said, "No, you're not answering the question about what were you doing in that theater," And so, but you watch, anybody that tried to be a moderator with power to clean up the environment. That's where Trump was like, "I'll never debate again," because he wouldn't let me, and he was, biased against, me and stuff like that. But how do you arm people like journalists to think maybe more like rhetoricians or rhetorical guardians of the space? Because they are completely outgunned by the right.
Well, maybe it just gets back to the audience that when the arena is full of people who want the gladiatorial battle.
It's more exciting. I would arm, like, I'm not sure Biden is there right off the cuff that much, but just give him some good lines about just, okay, felon, okay, President felon. Like, what are you going to do with that? You're going to let all the felons out, all your buddies? Just hit him with this stuff because he's so vulnerable to comedy.
Yeah, it is true. He is absolutely anemic to comedy. That's why we could not have a national press corps dinner with Trump, right? That could not exist.
Well, wasn't that the story that he got slammed too hard at the Obama
Well,
press corps dinner, and that's why he ran?
That his whole running for president was somehow born of that moment. I don't know.
Yeah. Because of course he ran for president, and every year since 1998 or whatever.
But there is a point at which satire simply won't work there. I mean, I think even Colbert kind of walked that line with W, but somehow that didn't have created a lot of discomfort. It wasn't quite the same. Whereas Laura Bush lampooned him quite successfully. So, there's something to that somehow when you're out on that limb, satire won't work, parody won't work. And which kind of gets back to
direct insults. Direct insults always work. Like when they're done well, it goes back to the roast battles. Like a real roaster. Like
we really need a Don Rickles kind of a.
Now you need Don Rickles writers. But if you had the roast team from Tom Brady's roast, say just write me as many Trump roasts as you can. Extract 5 of the best lines and then arm Biden with them during the debate where he just pulls them out at the right time. It would eviscerate Trump.
I don't watch Jimmy Kimmel as a regular thing, but I've been getting his snippets, and he's probably the connoisseur at this point in time, I think, of the Trump joke. Seems to.
Yeah, well, Trump set him up as a villain. Like he literally started mentioning him. At the Academy Awards, it's one of the great comebacks of all time.
Absolutely.
When he's simply saying, "I got a tweet here," and Trump's taking shots at him. He goes, "This isn't past your jail time."
Right.
Perfect. My thing was, I wanted to know who the writer was.
You think somebody wrote that and brought it up rather than?
Oh yeah, that joke. I bet you they had that joke in the hopper for months.
Had it in his pocket, ready to do that.
Yeah, because that's what you do. You just have this great writing staff, and you collect jokes all the time.
Okay, well, so anyway, that stuff is going on already. I mean, even on the morning news shows, they'll show clips of Kimmel and Colbert doing a Trump lampoon on the whatever the.
Right, but it doesn't get into the actual debates.
True. So.
Like,
well,
Reagan's,
and maybe
there
we need
you
to
go
start
again.
sorting out these frames, because when you say comedy is and how fond I am of that as the kind of avatar or edge of certain kinds of ways of opening up our perspectives, but at the same time, what we really have got here is a tragic mode. And that to me is the more profound thing going on is, when Trump comes out and spews his stuff, this country is going downhill. What I think the articles of faith among the entire crowd is that we're heading for disaster and ruin. Now, how they see in any of that salvation, redemption, change, I can't even begin to imagine. It's maybe too abstract as how this connects back to some sort of fundamentalism, some sort of regressive recommitment to, Genesis or whatever. I don't know. But all those threads are there for some part of that population. But there is this sort of litany. And it was really interesting, even in Nikki Haley's, her speech where she ended the campaign, suspended her campaign. It was the same litany, even though she had been criticizing Trump. It was the same litany of, Biden is, and Democrats and progressivism, all of this is leading to some, apocalypse, some sort of great ruin here. And the evidence of decay is everywhere. And, and then people's sense of what's going on with the economy or the culture, or that's all. So anyway, this is a pretty heavy duty,
Yeah, it is. It's just
self-reinforcing tragic frame. And then you have a third alternative here, which is the kind of like the court system, the rule of law, the process of Congress. It is supposed to, kind of not be either one of those things, I guess, that we have some sort of faith in. So I don't know. I think maybe the tragics would accuse the comics also of being destructive of the.
Sure. If you're just, again, fabricating dystopia, you can pull anybody into that whirlpool.
But that is, the point of the Rabelaisian idea of carnival or Mardi Gras, as a simple example, is that, okay, once a year you turn it all up upside down on its head and it rights itself, right? So I think this is the thing about, comedy is they survive the joke. And it keeps you aware, and it keeps, an open perspective and an alternative perspective alive. But it is not destructive. Whereas tragedy depends upon destruction. Tragedy depends upon sacrifice. Something bad, something's got to be destroyed here. So,
well, and the left is caught in the tragic loop too, right? The idea that you've got to make people afraid enough of this idea of autocracy, of a Trump second term, of him saying this past week, I'm going to, fire all the generals and install my people. I'm going to go after my political opponents, in the courts like they have with me. Like, we have to make that as real as possible. And like earlier when I mentioned the Nazis, people always get nervous if you try to drag everything into, hey, this eventually leads to Nazism, because that's too much tragedy. They're like, oh, you're claiming too much. I'm like, well, the problem is that America has never experienced autocracy. Like, it's always been an abstraction to us. Yeah, we kind of watched it across the water in Germany years and years ago, but we've never had it here. We don't know what that even feels like, to have somebody just saying, nah, I'm going to dump that law and we're going to do this. Right. And Trump is literally a bad boss, like, who's a bad autocrat. He comes in, he just makes arbitrary decisions, screws everything up, and then blames everybody when it fails. Right. But we've never really experienced that kind of tragic frame in our politics here.
Well, I think that's right. I think that doesn't keep us from kind of accusing people of it along the way.
No,
many people regarded FDR as that kind of tyranny as well, I suppose, and many regarded Obama, I suppose, in that kind of way. So
they still do that. He's still running things from behind the scenes. He's so autocratic that, yeah, he'll never leave power.
For years, I would have my students read a Hitler speech where the word German and Germany was taken out and America put in. And so I'm saying, who talks like this? And pretty much all of them, right? Pretty much in some way or another, every third-party candidate kind of, used to have a similar spiel. But to some extent, I mean, the America great thing again is not much different than make Germany great again,
I
right?
mean, they literally said "Make Germany Great," right? That was the
Right.
slogan.
Yes, absolutely. And certainly, and then literally Reagan said it. I mean, you go
Yep.
back to Nixon, he more or less said all of those same kinds of things. So I guess the point of all that was, yeah, that rhetoric is there. The rhetoric of unification, the rhetoric of victimization, all of those kinds of things. The rhetoric in this case of grievance. Um, but what kind of situation does that rhetoric have to encounter before it leads to these kinds of consequences? So that's what I would ask the students to sort of say, what would have to happen in America in order for, because we feel insulated from that. So what if we did have this terrible recession? What if, would it have to be as bad as Germany in 1919 or 1920 to create this kind of movement? Well, the upshot is I think maybe we're at that moment. Right? Maybe we now know kind of some answer to that question. It's that it does not have to be an analogous kind of situation. For
Well, it doesn't
instance,
have to have the same material conditions. I think when you've got as much distribution as you have now, it's not, transistor radios and German, living rooms. It's high production value, social media and cable media, never ending, with no gatekeepers. And you're like, good God, this stuff is very effective when you match it up with this distribution and production system.
I guess, the same sentences, well, gee, back in the good old days when things worked. Or the recent factoid about how something like 69% of Americans think we're in a recession. And that fact on just Democrats alone is like 49%. So back to your point is that we have ways of sustaining that perception, I guess, regardless of the material circumstances. Clearly, this is not anything comparable to the kinds of conditions that led to the actual Nazi movement. And which maybe there's something hopeful in that, which is that it won't have the same endurance either.
Well, look what happens when we have, a little spell of inflation, from corporate greed or whatever, and watch. I mean, it just dominated for a while, and then the prices started coming down. They had to move away, and they moved away from it. But the power of that just kind of started to wash up. It's like, oh, things have gotten more expensive. We're falling apart as an entire nation. So I guess any material circumstance that does match up with the dystopian rhetoric like that is kind of a dangerous tandem.
Oh, I think the rhetoric of inflation is still very vital out there. I think that is what people think is going on. When it, if you start parsing out certain facts, I mean, highest unemployment in many years. Wages have actually increased faster than costs for the first time in many years. Those are all inflationary trends. COVID itself was hugely inflationary because the damage to the economy was such. And every time you start spending tons of money to keep the economy from collapsing, then money's worth less. Then that's inflation. Then eggs cost more. So all of those things are going on. So it's still, it's just sort of, once again, the inability for people to understand economics well enough to realize where this started and where it's headed and why.
Well, it goes back to our court system problem, right? The inability to understand legal situations because you're not following any of the court processes, the inability to understand anything complex in our culture because you don't actually know anything about that thing. And you're not following a process. And again, this goes back to when I talk to friends and people like that who kind of come into my orbit and they've been absorbed over into the Borg. And I'm like, well, yeah, I get it. I get it why you think the border is a problem, but let's just step back. If you're interested, like, let me take you into the meta space for just a minute. And, like, when's the last time you dealt with a illegal immigrant? And they're like, well, some guys built my pool. And I'm like, are you assuming they were illegal immigrants? He's like, well, they spoke Spanish. I'm like, let's just unpack any of this, you know, and if you can bring them to the meta
Well, even
space.
if they were, there really wasn't a fentanyl party going on in your backyard at that time, right?
Yeah,
Even if
I'm
they
like, were
were,
they, you know, what were they doing other than digging,
they
you
were
know, in the hot
working.
sun, you know? So, well, yeah, I think the court thing is a very interesting context for all of this. It brings things down to a type of hyper rationality, you know, a hyper logic, which we're not even used to regular or even mild formalized logical processes.
Right.
But again, that's not what's penetrating out into the world. It's there, but people are not accessing that type of thinking.
Well, I think there's various components here. One is that we got, you know, part of push and pull on this is elites, right? And so the elites operating in these more difficult, you say this is difficult, this is for the hoi polloi or whatever. And there's some truth to that people used to only read one account from it through you know, strength through certain kinds of ideological processes. And that version of things did not have to stand up to the great, you know, maelstrom of doo-doo. So it was, you know, as we've observed many times, sort of the presence of this media and its continuing recycling of this kind of excess and turning this stuff into a cage match is a pretty, you know, but it is involving more and more people. And so, you know, you look at some of these people in Congress and you go, how did you ever get there? Well, you know, and they are kinds of folk heroes, I suppose, and one has to pay some sort of attention to that. But to me, you know, I was trying to parse out that this is a kind of a different brand of cynicism. I mean, there's a kind of a classic brand of cynicism, which is the displaced idealist. Okay, and that's kind of got that's an ironic point of view that comedy embraces, is that we're constantly comparing this reality or the facts of this to the ideal and finding it short, you know. But there's kind of hope and progress interlaced with that agenda. But there's this other kind of, you know, more corrosive, weaponized cynicism, which seems to be easy, right? It doesn't build toward anything. It does not progress an ideal. All it is destructive. And maybe we need to start parsing that out somehow. But it does seem to be kind of the rhetorical weapon at this point in time. And it can't lead to any place good.
Yeah, I think that the feeling we're very good at destruction. Like it's and I see this sometimes like with Trump coming up, that he's going after very old institutions that have been around and functioning, the State Department, the EPA, you know, all these places, the Education Department. He's going after all these institutions that have been functioning for a long time. It doesn't matter whether they're functioning, you know, incredibly well or not well, they're functioning. And it's like Reagan came in with the abstract indictment of government in general, and then that the welfare system was, you know, letting people cheat and be lazy. But now they've extended it. Trump came in as going after individual specific institutions within the broader government. You know, so it's the same thing about cynically looking at government and sort of, you know, cutting the hamstrings and the vocal cords of government itself.
Right.
You know, and therefore we don't trust any of the institutions, courts, anything, you know, the FBI. And it is that sense of they've weaponized, I guess, a destructive cynicism and fed that fire. Has that created, you know, a malaise about the culture now on both sides?
And is that part of an empowerment and mode of participation for people who otherwise would be shut out of the system? And that seems to be the way that it seems to wield that kind of, and maybe for many of those people, it doesn't have to do more than that. In other words, they don't expect necessarily to win.
Well, maybe it's the natural evolution, you know, of the 60s going after the military and, you know, thing like that, and the cynicism about government from the idealists, like you're talking about. and now the cynicism about government from the non-idealists, so it's spread to where it is this, circulating, reaffirming cynicism that's just kind of taken over.
Yeah. So I mean, the idea, one center post idea here is that everything is corrupt, right? And once again, that's how we can dismiss our corruptness. Everything is corrupt, and so there is no hope for something other. But it's also corrosion, right? That which is another kind of, I guess, aspect of the literal idea of corruption, right? That all this stuff is corroded. And once again, I guess that is the, to flash back to Germany in 1923. That is the sense of which then what makes people ripe for some kind of regenerative, and we don't want that, right? Progress does not want to be through regeneration and sacrifice of other people. That we tried that. That's not good. But that is kind of the only unifying option.
You get the regenerators, or the nefarians in regenerators clothing, right? It's like, I'm here to save, the day. I'm here to regenerate, but we have to kill a bunch of people first.
Well, yeah, I mean, and not to wade too far into this pond, but the little kind of slip about the unified Reich, right, that shows up, that but directly out of Trump's mouth, we need me to unify America. I mean, that anomaly, no, that could never happen, right? This is not unifying rhetoric. What would it take in order for that to occur? Well, that means the people who do not fit this agreement, this identity, have to be subjugated, dismissed, marginalized in some fashion or another. So there you go.
Well, yeah, I mean, to bolster completely fabricated rhetoric, you've got to take out the rational people.
Okay. Or continue to subvert rationality in such a way that they are themselves. And that seems to me we're on the cusp of that. That someone wanting to claim rationality, let's be rational about this, has no voice whatsoever. Which is why I don't claim credentials when I get into these conversations.
Yeah, you don't want to step up on a pedestal when everybody's got machetes.
There you go. There you go. Well, anyway, there's work to be done.
For sure.
I'm not sure what the best path to do it, but I do think we're at. I've always tried to remain chipper and balanced about. Well, maybe it's not as bad as everybody thinks.
I'm the same way.
It's getting kind of bad.
You can't do much when you're just drowning in the tragic frame. So, it's kind of like I move in and out. I like moving in and out of these worlds because I find regeneration in comedy. I find, purpose sometimes in the tragic frame, or trying to fight through the tragic frame. But I think ultimately, the reason why I like rhetoric so much is it gives you kind of a little place to stand over here that's kind of outside all of that, and just sort of looking and saying, hey y'all, have you thought about what that's doing over there? Maybe we don't want to do this Third Reich, rhetoric, because it kind of goes weird ways. Do you remember? So
it does promise the idea that technique can intervene and change things.
Yeah. So let's agree with that, because we're rhetoricians and we need that. We need that claim.
There you go.
All right. Well, enjoyed it. Once again, this has been the Rhetoric Warriors Political Persuasion Training for America, the Democracy Protection Initiative. I'm not sure what I'm going to end up calling it, but it's been super fun. Thanks for popping on, Dr. Payne, and we will see you again next time.